After the rally, there were a few days during which neither Sams nor Kinnison was on Earth. That the Cosmocrats' presidential candidate and the first Lensman were both with the fleet was not a secret. In fact, it was advertised. Everyone was told why they were out there, and almost everyone approved. Nor was their absence felt. Developments, fast and terrific, were slammed home. Cosmocratic spellbinders in every state of North America waved the flag, pointed with pride, and viewed with alarm, in the very best tradition of North American politics. But above all, there appeared upon every newsstand and in every bookshop of the continent, at opening time of the day following Rally Day, a book of over 1,800 pages of fine print. A book the publication of which had given Sams himself no little concern. "But I'm afraid of it," he had protested. "We know it's true, but there's material on almost every page for the biggest libel and slander suits in history." "I know it," the bald and paunchy Lensman attorney had replied. "Fully, I hope they do take action against us, but I'm absolutely certain they won't." "You hope they do?" "Yes. If they take the initiative, they can't prevent us from presenting our evidence in full, and there is no court in existence, however corrupt, before which we could not win. What they want and must have is delay, avoidance of any issue, until after the election. I see." Sams was convinced. The location of the patrol's grand fleet had been concealed from all inhabitants of the Solarian system, friends and foes alike. But the climactic battle, liberating as it did energy sufficient to distort the very warp and woof of the fabric of space itself, could not be hidden or denied, or even belittled. It was not, however, advertised or blazoned abroad. Then as now, the new shocks wanted to know, instantly, and via long-range communicators, vastly more than those responsible for security cared to tell. Then as now, the latter said as little as it was humanly possible to say. Everyone knew that the patrol had won a magnificent victory, but nobody knew who or what the enemy had been. Since the rank and file knew it, everyone knew that only a fraction of the Black Fleet had actually been destroyed, but nobody knew where the remaining vessels went or what they did. Everyone knew that about 95% of the patrol's astonishingly huge grand fleet had come from, and was on its way back to, the planet Bennett, and knew since Bennettons would in a few weeks be scampering gaily all over space in general what Bennett was, but nobody knew why it was. Thus, when the North American contingent landed at New York Spaceport, everyone whom the newsman could reach was literally mobbed. However, in accordance with the aphorism ascribed to the wise old owl, those who knew the least said the most. But the telenews ace who had once interviewed both Kinnison and Sams wasted no time upon small fry. He insisted on seeing the two top lensmen and kept on insisting until he did see them. "Nothing to say," Kinnison said curtly, leaving no doubt whatever that he meant it. "All talking, if any, will be done by first Lensman Sams. Now, all you millions of telenews listeners, I am interviewing First Lensman Sams himself. A little closer to the mic, please, First Lensman. Now, sir, what everybody wants to know is who are the blacks?" "I don't know." "You don't know? On the lens, sir?" "On the lens. I still don't know." "I see. But you have suspicions or ideas?" "You can guess." "I can guess. But that's all. It would be a guess. And my guess, folks, is that his guess would be a very highly informed guess. Will you tell the public, First Lensman Sams, what your guess is?" "I will." If this reply astonished the new shock, it staggered Kinnison and the others who knew Sams best. It was, however, a coldly calculated political move. While it will probably be several weeks before we can furnish detailed and unassailable proof, it is my considered opinion that the Black Fleet was built and controlled by the Morgantown Isaacson machine, that they, all unknown to any of us, enticed, corrupted, and seduced a world, or several worlds, to their program of domination and enslavement, that they intended by armed force to take over the continent of North America, and through it, the whole Earth, and all the other planets, adherent to civilization, that they intended to hunt down and kill every Lensman, and to subvert the Galactic Council to their own ends. This is what you wanted. That's fine, sir, just what we wanted. But just one more thing, sir. The newsman had obtained infinitely more than he had expected to get. Yet, good newsman-like, he wanted more. Just a word, if you will, Mr. Sams, as to these trials and the White Book. I can add very little, I'm afraid, to what I have already said and what is in the book. And that little can be classed as, I told you so. We are trying, and will continue to try, to force those criminals to trial, to break up, to prohibit an unending series of hair-splitting delays. We want, and are determined to get, legal action, to make each of those we have accused defend himself in court and under oath. Morgan and his crew, however, are working desperately to avoid any action at all, because they know that we can and will prove every allegation we have made. The Telenews ace signed off. Sams and Kinnison went to their respective offices, and cosmocratic orators throughout the nation held a field day. They glowed and scintillated with triumph. They yelled themselves hoarse, leather lunge tub thumpers though they were, in pointing out the unsullied purity, the spotless perfection of their own party and its every candidate for office, in shuddering revulsion at the never to be sufficiently condemned, proved and demonstrated villainy and blackguardy of the opposition. And the nationalists, although they had been dealt a terrific and entirely unexpected blow, worked near miracles of politics with what they had. Morgan and his minions ranted and raved. They were being jobbed. They were being crucified by the moneyed powers. All those allegations and charges were sheerest fabrications, false, utterly vicious, containing nothing whatever of truth. They, not the patrol, were trying to force a showdown, to vindicate themselves and to confute those unspeakably unscrupulous lensmen before election day. And they were succeeding. Why, otherwise, had not a single one of the thousands of accused even been arrested? Ask that lying first lensman, Virgil Sams. Ask that rock-hearted, iron-headed, conscienceless murderer Roderick Kinnison. But do not, at peril of your sanity, submit your minds to their lenses. And why, the reader asks, were not at least some of those named persons arrested before election day? And your historian must answer frankly that he does not know. He is not a lawyer. It would be of interest to some few of us to follow in detail at least one of those days of legal battling in one of the high courts of the land, to quote verbatim at least a few of the many thousands of pages of transcripts, but to most of us the technicalities involved would be boring in the extreme. But couldn't the voters tell easily enough which side was on the offensive and which on the defensive, which pressed for action and which insisted on postponement and delay? They could have, easily enough, if they had cared enough about the basic issues involved to make the necessary mental effort. But almost everyone was too busy doing something else, and it was so much easier to take somebody else's word for it. And finally, thinking is an exercise to which all too few brains are accustomed. But Morgan neither ranted nor raved nor blustered when he sat in conference with this faintly blue superior, who had come storming in as soon as he had learned of the crushing defeat of the Black Fleet. The Colonian was very highly concerned, so much so that the undertone of his peculiar complexion was turning slowly to a delicate shade of green. How did that happen? How could it happen? Why was I not informed of the patrol's real power? How could you be guilty of such stupidity? Now, I have to report to Screw-on of the Ike. He's pure, undiluted poison, and if word of this catastrophe ever gets up to Plur, come down out of the stratosphere, Fernald, Morgan countered, bitingly. Don't try to make me the goat, I won't sit still for it. It happened because they could build a bigger fleet than we could. You were in on that, all of it. You knew what we were doing, and approved it, all of it. You were as badly fooled as I was. You were not informed because I could find out nothing. I could learn no more of their Bennett than they could of our Petron. As to reporting, you will of course do as you please, but I would advise you not to cry too much before you're really hurt. This battle isn't over yet, my friend. The Colonian had been a badly shaken entity. It was a measure of his state of mind that he did not liquidate the temerarious Turian then and there. But since Morgan was as undisturbed as ever, and as sure of himself, he began to regain his wonted aplomb. His color became again its normal pale blue. I will forgive your insubordination this time, since there were no witnesses, but use no more such language to me, he said, stiffly. "I fail to perceive any basis for your optimism. The only chance now remaining is for you to win the election. And how can you do that? You must be losing ground steadily and rapidly." "Not as much as you might think." Morgan pulled down a large, carefully drawn chart. "This line represents the hidebound nationalists, whom nothing we can do will alienate from the party. This one, the equally hidebound cosmocrats. The balance of power lies, as always, with the independents these here, and many of them are not as independent as is supposed. We can buy or bring pressure to bear on half of them that cuts them down to this size here. So, no matter what the patrol does, it can affect only this relatively small block here. And it is this block we are fighting for. We are losing a little ground. And steadily, yes. Since we can't conceal from anybody with half a brain the fact that we're doing our best to keep the cases from ever coming to trial. But here's the actual observed line of sentiment as determined from psychological indices up to yesterday. Here's the extrapolation of that line to election day. It forecasts us to get just under 49% of the total vote. And is there anything cheerful about that? Fernald asked frostily. "I'll say there is." Morgan's big face assumed a sneering smile, an expression never seen by any voter. "This chart deals only with living, legally registered, bona fide voters. Now, if we can come that close to winning an absolutely honest election, how do you figure we can possibly lose the kind this one is going to be? We're in power, you know. We've got this machine, and we know how to use it." "Oh, yes. I remember vaguely. You told me about North American politics once, a few years ago. Dead men, ringers, repeaters, ballot box stuffing, and so on. You said, and so on, is right, Chief," Morgan assured him, heartily. "Everything goes. This time, it'll be one of the biggest landslides in North American history. I will, then, defer any action until after the election. That will be the smart thing to do, Chief. Then you won't have to take any, or make any report at all." And upon this highly satisfactory note, the conference closed, and Morgan was actually as confident as he had appeared. His charts were actual and factual. He knew the power of money and the effectiveness of pressure. B knew the capabilities of the various units of his machine. He did not, however, know two things: Jill Sam's insidious, deeply hidden Voters Protective League, and the bright flame of loyalty pervading the Galactic Patrol. Thus, between times of bellowing and screaming his carefully prepared, rabble-rousing speeches, he watched calmly and contentedly the devious workings of his smooth and efficient organization, until the day before election, that is. Then hordes of young men and young women went suddenly and briefly to work. At least 4 in every precinct of the entire nation. They visited, it seemed, every residence and every dwelling unit everywhere. They asked questions, and took notes, and vanished. And the machine's operatives, after the alarm was given, could not find man or girl or notebook. And the Galactic Patrol, which had never before paid any attention to elections, had given leave in ample time to its every North American citizen. Vessels of the North American contingent were grounded and practically emptied of personnel. Bases and stations were depopulated, and even from every distant world, every patrolman registered in any North American precinct came to spend the day at home. Morgan began then to worry, but there was nothing he could do about the situation, or was there? If the civilian boys and girls were checking the registration books, and they were, it was as legally appointed checkers. If the uniformed boys and girls were all coming home to vote, and they were that too, was their inalienable right. But boys and girls were notoriously prone to accident and to debauchery. But again, Morgan was surprised, and this time, taken heavily aback. The web which had protected Grand Rally so efficiently, but greatly enlarged now, was functioning again. And Morgan and his minions spent a sleepless and thoroughly uncomfortable night. Election day dawned clear, bright, and cool, auguring a record turnout. Voting was early and extraordinarily heavy. The polls were crowded. There was, however, very little disorder, surprisingly little, in view of the fact that the cosmocratic watchers, instead of being the venal whites of custom, were cold-eyed. unreachable men and women who seemed to know by sight every voter in the precinct. At least they spotted on sight and challenged without hesitation every ringer, every dead one, every repeater, and every imposter who claimed the right to vote. And those challenges, being borne out in every case by the carefully checked registration lists, were in every case upheld. Not all of the policemen on duty, especially in the big cities, were above suspicion, of course. But whenever any one of those officers began to show a willingness to play ball with the machine, a calm, quiet-eyed patrolman would remark, casually, "Better see that this election stays straight, bud, and strictly according to the lists and signatures, or you're apt to find yourself listed in the big book, along with the rest of the rats." It was not that the machine liked the way things were going, or that it did not have goon squads on the job. It was that there were, everywhere, and always, more patrolmen than there were goons. And those patrolmen, however young in years some of them might have appeared to be, were space-bronzed veterans, space-hardened fighting men, armed with the last word in blasters Lewiston, Mark 17. To the boy's friends and neighbors, of course, his Lewiston was practically invisible. It was merely an article of clothing, the same as his pants. It carried no more of significance, of threat or of menace, than did the pistol and the club of the friendly Irish cop on the beat. But the goon did not see the patrolman as a friend. He saw the keen, clear, sharply discerning eyes, the long, strong fingers, the smoothly flowing muscles, so eloquent of speed and of power. He saw the Lewiston for what it was, the deadliest, most destructive hand weapon known to man. Above all, he saw the difference in numbers, 6 or 7 or 8 patrolmen to 4 or 5 or 6 of his own kind. If more hoods arrived, so did more spacemen. If some departed, so did a corresponding number of the wearers of the space, black and silver. "Ain't you getting tired of sticking around here, George?" one mobster asked confidentially of one patrolman. "I am. What say we and some of you fellows round up some girls and go have us a party?" George denied. His voice was gay and careless, but his eyes were icy cold. "My uncle's cousin's stepson is running for second assistant dog catcher, and I can't leave until I find out whether he wins or not." Thus, nothing happened. Thus, the invisible, but nevertheless, terrific tension did not erupt into open battle. And thus, for the first time in North America's long history, a presidential election was 99 and 99/100% pure. Evening came. The polls closed. The Cosmocrats' headquarters for the day, the grand ballroom of the Hotel van der Voort, became the goal of every patrolman who thought he stood any chance at all of getting in. Kinnison had been there all day, of course. So had Joy, his wife, who for lack of space has been sadly neglected in these annals. Betty, their daughter, had come in early, accompanied by a husky and personable young lieutenant, who has no other place in this story. Jack Kinnison arrived, with Dimples Maynard dazzlingly blonde, wearing a screamingly red wisp of silk. She too has been shamefully slighted here, although she was never slighted anywhere else. "The first time I ever saw her," Jack was wont to say, "I went right into a flat spin, running around in circles and biting myself in the small of the back, and couldn't pull out of it for 4 hours. That Miss Maynard should be a very special item is not at all surprising, in view of the fact that she was to become the wife of one of the Kinnisons and the mother of another. The first Lensman, who had been in and out, came in to stay. So did Jill and her inseparable Mason Northrop, and so did others, singly or by 2s or 3s, Lensmen and their wives, Conway and Cleo Costigan, Dr. and Mrs. Rodebush and Cleveland, Admiral and Mrs. Clayton, ditto Schweikert, and Dr. Nels Bergenholm, and others. Nor were they all North Americans, or even human. Rularian was there, and so was Blocky, stocky Dronvire of Rigel 4. No outsider could tell, ever, what any Lensman was thinking, to say nothing of such a monstrous Lensman as Dronvire, but that hotel was being covered as no political headquarters had ever been covered before. The returns came in, seesawing maddeningly back and forth, faster and faster. The maritime provinces split 50-50. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, Cosmocrat. New York, upstate, Cosmocrat. New York City, on the basis of incomplete but highly significant returns, was piling up a huge nationalist majority. Pennsylvania Labor Nationalist. Ohio Farmers Cosmocrat. 12 southern states went SIL, and 6. Chicago, as usual, solidly for the machine. Likewise Quebec, and Ottawa, and Montreal, and Toronto, and Detroit, and Kansas City, and St. Louis, and New Orleans, and Denver. Then northern, and western, and far southern states came and even the score. Saskatchewan, Alberta, British, and Alaska all went Cosmocrat. So did Washington, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and most of the states of Mexico. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the Cosmocrats had a slight but definite lead and were, finally, holding it. At 4 o'clock the lead was larger, but California was still an unknown quantity. California could wreck everything. How would California go? Especially, how would California's 2 metropolitan districts, the 2 most independent and free-thinking and least predictable big cities of the nation, how would they go? At 5 o'clock California seemed safe. Except for Los Angeles and San Francisco, the Cosmocrats had swept the state, and in those 2 great cities they held a commanding lead. It was still mathematically possible, however, for the nationalists to win. It's in the bag. Let's start the celebration, someone shouted, and others took up the cry. Stop it. No. Kinnison's parade ground voice cut through the noise. No celebration is in order or will be held until the result becomes certain or Witherspoon concedes. The 2 events came practically together. Witherspoon conceded a couple of minutes before it became mathematically impossible for him to win. Then came the celebration, which went on and on interminably. At the first opportunity, however, Kinnison took Sams by the arm, led him without a word into a small office, and shut the door. Sams, also saying nothing, sat down in the swivel chair, put both feet up on the desk, lit a cigarette, and inhaled deeply. Well, Verge satisfied? Kinnison broke the silence at last. His lens was off. We're on our way. Yes, Rod. Fully? At last. No more than his friend did he dare to use his lens to plumb the depths he knew so well were there. Now, it will roll under its own power. No one man now is, or ever will be indispensable to the Galactic Patrol. Nothing can stop it now. Epilogue: the murder of Senator Morgan, in his own private office, was never solved. If it had occurred before the election, suspicion would certainly have fallen upon Roderick Kinnison, but as it was, it did not. By no stretch of the imagination could anyone conceive of Rod the Rock kicking a man after he had knocked him down. Not that Morgan did not have powerful and vindictive enemies in the underworld. He had so many that it proved impossible to fasten the crime to any one of them. Officially, Kinnison was on a 5-year leave of absence from the Galactic Patrol. The office of Port Admiral had been declared vacant, and the Superdreadnaught Chicago had been detached entirely from the fleet and assigned to the office of the President of North America. Actually, however, in every respect that counted, Roderick Kinnison was still Port Admiral, and would remain so until he died or until the council retired him by force. Officially, Kinnison was taking a short, well-earned vacation from the job in which he had been so outstandingly successful. Actually, he was doing a quick flit to Petrine to get personally acquainted with the new lensmen and to see what kind of a job they were doing. Besides, Virgil Sams was already there. He arrived. He got acquainted. He saw. He approved. How about coming back to tell us with me, Verge? He asked, when the visiting was done. I've got to make a speech, and it'd be nice to have you hold my head. I'd be glad to. And the Chicago took off. Half of North America was dark when they neared Tellus. All of it, apparently, was obscured by clouds. Only the navigating officers of the vessel knew where they were. Nor did either of the 2 lensmen care. They were having too much fun arguing about the talents and abilities of their respective grandsons. The Chicago landed. A bug was waiting. The 2 lensmen, without an order being given, were whisked away. Sams had not asked where the speech was to be given, and Kinnison simply did not realize that he had not told him all about it. Thus, Sams had no idea that he was just leaving Spokane Spaceport, Washington. After a few miles of fast, open country driving, the bug reached the city. It slowed down, swung into brightly lighted Maple Street, and passed a sign reading Cannon Hill something or other, neither of which names meant anything to either Lensman. Kinnison looked at his friend's red-thatched head and glanced at his watch. "Looking at you reminds me I need a haircut," he remarked. "Should have got one aboard, but didn't think of it. Joy told me if I come home without it, she'll braid it in pigtails and tie it up with pink ribbons. And you're shaggier than I am. You've got to get one or else buy yourself a violin. What say we do it now? Have we got time enough?" "Plenty." Then to the driver, "Stop at the first barber shop you see, please." "Yes, sir. There's a good one a few blocks further along." The bug sped down Maple Street, turned sharply into plainly marked 12th Avenue. Neither Lensman saw the sign. "Here you are, sir. Thanks." There were 2 barbers and 2 chairs, both empty. The lensman, noticing that the place was neatly kept and meticulously clean, sat down and resumed their discussion of 2 extremely unusual infants. The barbers went busily to work, just as well, though bet really that the kids didn't marry each other. At that, Kinnison concluded finally, "The way it is, we've each got a grandson, it'd be tough to have to share one with you." Sams made no reply to this sally, for something was happening. The fact that this fair-skinned, yellow-haired, blue-eyed barber was left-handed had not rung any bells. There were lots of left-handed barbers. He had neither seen nor heard the cat, a less than half-grown, gray, tiger-striped kitten which, after standing up on its hind legs to sniff ecstatically at his nylon-clad ankles, had uttered a couple of almost inaudible meows and had begun to purr happily. Crouching, tensing its strong little legs, it leaped almost vertically upward. Its tail struck the barber's elbow. Hastily brushing the kitten aside, and beginning profuse apologies both for his awkwardness and for the presence of the cat, he had never done such a thing before, and he would drown him forthwith. The barber applied a styptic pencil, and recollection hit Sams a pile driver blow. "Well, he voiced 3 highly un-Sams-like, highly specific expletives which, as Mentor had foretold so long before, were both self-derogatory and profane. Then, as full realization dawned, he bit a word squarely in two. "Excuse me, please, Mr. Carbonaro, for this outrageous display. It was not the scratch, nor was any of it your fault. Nothing you could have done would have. You know my name?" The astonished barber interrupted. "Yes, you were, recommended to me by a friend." Whatever Sams could say would make things worse. The truth, wild as it was, would have to be told, at least in part. "You do not look like an Italian, but perhaps you have enough of that racial heritage to believe in prophecy?" "Of course, sir. There have always been prophets, true prophets." "Good." This event was foretold in detail, in such complete detail that I was deeply, terribly shocked. Even to the kitten. "You call it Thomas?" "Yes, sir. Thomas Aquinas. It is actually a female. In here, Thomasina." The kitten had been climbing enthusiastically up his leg. Now, as he held a pocket invitingly open, she sprang into it, settled down, and began to purr blissfully. While the barbers and Kinnison stared pop-eyed, Sams went on. "She is determined to adopt me, and it would be a shame not to requite such affection. Would you part with her for, say, 10 credits? 10 credits. I'll be glad to give her to you for nothing. 10 it is, then. One more thing, Rod. You always carry a pocket rule. Measure this scratch, will you? You'll find it's mighty close to 3 millimeters long. Not close. Verge, it's exactly 3 millimeters, as near as this vernier can scale it, and just above and parallel to the cheekbone. Check. Just above and as parallel as though it had been ruled there by a draftsman. Well, that's that. Let's get finished with the haircuts, before you're late for your speech." And the barbers, with thoughts which will be left to the imagination, resumed their interrupted tasks. "Spill it, Verge." Kinnison leased the pent-up thought. If Carbonaro, who did not know Sams at all, had been amazed at what had been happening, Kinnison, who had known him so long and so well, had been literally and completely dumbfounded. What in hell's behind this? What's the story? Give Sams told him, and a mental silence fell, a silence too deep for intelligible thought. Each was beginning to realize that he never would, and never could know what mentor of Erigia really was. The end.